Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 5, Notes 5. So we're going to start talking about quadratic applications. So we're going to take what we've learned with quadratics so far in Unit 5, and we're going to kind of apply it to all the different applications that you can see. So the first applications, one of them that we found was talking about when items hit the ground. So when we talk about things hitting the ground, that means we're going to be setting that quadratic equal to 0, which means we want to use the zero product property or quadratic formula. Now for this one, I actually have to plug a few things in to create my quadratic. So I notice that it tells me that my initial velocity is 10. Well, that's going to get plugged in for v. Then I know that I'm letting the ball go 2 meters above the ground. That's going to be h. And that the gravity constant was 1.6, so that's going to be g. So let's start by plugging that into our quadratic. So then 1.6 t squared plus our velocity times t plus our height. So let's go ahead, and right now that's just equal to the height, which we know is going to be 0 when we hit the ground. So let's actually multiply those two out. Then that should be a negative 1/2. You get negative 0.8 t squared plus 10t plus 2 is equal to 0. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug this into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to do t is equal to opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that over 2 times a. Now remember, the first thing we want to do is simplify just what's underneath that square root. So we're not going to do the square root quite yet. So we have negative 10 plus or minus the square root. So in my calculator, I'm going to do 10 squared minus 4 times negative 0.8 times 2. And when I do that, I get 125.6. And that's going to be divided by negative 1.6. So then, let's go ahead and let's plug this in. So I don't know what this square root is, so I'm going to go ahead and make my plus and minus version right away. So I have negative 10 plus the square root of 125.6. I'm going to type that on my calculator and hit enter. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to divide it by negative 1.6. And when I do that, I end up getting negative 0.75. Well, I'm going to throw that answer out. I definitely don't want to have negative time. That doesn't make sense. So now I'm going to try my minus version. So I'm going to do negative 10 minus the square root of 125.6. Again, hit enter on my calculator and then divide that by a negative 1.6. Now when I do that, I get 13.25, and then we're going to call that seconds. So that right there is my final answer for if I were to launch it on the moon, how long it would take to come back down. Now let's talk about Earth. So we're going to have that same formula, but we're going to be plugging in a different gravity constant that is 9.8. Everything else is going to stay the same. And again, it's still going to be set equal to 0 because we're trying to figure out when it's going to hit the ground. Well, let's simplify that equation just a smidge. So we're going to get negative 4.9 t squared plus 10t plus 2 is equal to 0. So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to plug that into the quadratic formula. So when we do that, we are going to have t is equal to opposite of b plus or minus the square root, come on little square root, there you are, of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is over 2 times a. Okay, so now again we want to simplify underneath the radical first and foremost. So I want to simplify this part first. So in my calculator I'm doing 10 squared minus 4 times negative 4.9 times 2. And when I type that in, I end up getting negative 10, and again I'm going to keep that square root in there for now, and I get 139.2. And then we're going to divide that by a negative 9.8. So now I want to go ahead and create my two different versions. So first let's try our plus version. Now in our experience in the past, the plus version has led to a negative number, but let's just check just in case. So I get negative 10 plus the square root of 139.2. Then you're going to enter that in your calculator, hit enter, and then take whatever answer you get and divide it by negative 9.8. And when you do that, you end up getting, surprise, surprise, a negative seconds. Then Next, what we want to do is we want to do the minus version. So now we're going to subtract and then divide by negative 9.8. So now when you plug that one into your calculator, you should get 2.42 seconds. So that would make sense. The Earth has a larger gravity constant, so the ball fell a lot faster on the Earth than it did on the Moon. Okay, so that's really what that problem was telling us. Let's take a look at this next one here. A projectile shot vertically up in the air from ground level. Its distance s in feet after t seconds is given by that equation. We want to find when s is 96 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 96 and I'm going to plug it in for s. So I get 96 is equal to 96t minus 16t squared. Now, you remember when we want to solve a quadratic, we need to figure out when it's equal to 0. That's the only way we can solve it. So I actually need to bring this 96 on over to the other side. Now, I want this in standard form because that makes it easier for me to set up the quadratic formula. So I'm going to put that squared term first, and then that t term, and then the last term. Okay, so then let's go ahead and let's start putting this into the quadratic formula. So we get t is equal to opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that over 2 times a. Again, remember, if you're struggling with that quadratic formula, you can go back and review a different video or go ahead and talk to me about it in class. Let's do a couple together. So next, let's simplify underneath the radical. So we're going to simplify that guy out first. So I'm going to type that into my calculator, the 96 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times negative 96. When I type that in my calculator, I end up getting 3,072. And that's going to be divided by a negative 32. So now I'm going to go ahead and create my two versions. So in my calculator, I'm going to type negative 96 plus the square root of 3,072. Then I'm going to hit enter and divide that by a negative 32. And when I do that, I end up getting 1.27 seconds. Now that makes sense. We actually could end up having two answers here because it could feasibly hit 96 feet on the way up and 96 feet on the way back down, which I think is what's going to happen. Because then, when you do your minus version, you also end up getting a positive number, which is 4.73 seconds. So both of those are plausible answers. So it ends up hitting it twice, once on the way up at 1.27 seconds, and once on the way down at 4.73 seconds. Think about that visually, okay? So here's where our 96 feet is on our parabola, and we're hitting it twice. So that's why there's two answers. Let's take a look at this crazy cat here. Okay, so I want to find the volume of this box. I'm trying to figure out what x is. So if this side is x minus 4 and it's a square, then this side is x minus 4. So really, my volume is 2 times x minus 4 times x minus 4. Now that's going to be equal to 441 centimeters. So now I want to solve this. The first thing I'm going to do is use the box method. So I want to go ahead and multiply out those x minus 4s. And then I end up getting x squared and then minus 4 here, or negative 4x, sorry, negative 4x, and negative 4x here, and positive 16. So then I have 2 times x squared minus, I can combine those two terms, right? Negative 4x minus 4x is negative 8x plus 16. Now recall that that's equal to 441. So now I need to take and multiply everything times 2. So then I get 2x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to 441. Now remember, in order for us to solve for x and use the quadratic formula, it has to be set equal to 0. So I need to subtract 441 from both sides. So I'm going to take my, this should be, forgot to multiply these guys by 2, so this should be a negative 16x, and this should be a positive 32. Good one, Miss Humbert. So 32 minus 441. So that's going to give us 2x squared minus 16x minus 409 is equal to 0. Now I'm going to solve this using the quadratic formula. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in right now. So I get x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times negative, or times our c, all of that over 2 times a. So remember, then your first step is going to be to simplify underneath the radical. Okay, so that's what you want to do first, is to simplify underneath the radical. So then I end up getting, there's my divided sign, so then I end up getting 16 plus or minus the square root of 3,528, and then that's going to be divided by 4. So now I can go ahead and make my two versions. So I'm going to do 16 plus the square root of 3,528. And then once I've done that, I'm going to divide that answer by 4. And I end up getting 18.84 for the first one. Then I can also do the minus version. Now, when I do the minus version, I end up getting a negative number. Okay, so when I do 16 minus the square root of 3,528, hit enter and divide it by 4, you end up getting a negative 10.8. Well, that doesn't make sense. Negative distance doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that answer out. So this is one of my dimensions, almost. Remember that it was x minus 4. So for our dimensions, we're going to take 18.84 and subtract 4. So then we get 14.84 centimeters by 14.84 centimeters by 2 for the height. Now, I know this problem can be really confusing. You guys are going to have one just like it on your practice problem. So if you're still confused, go ahead and do it with me. Let's take a look at it together. So let's take a look at this last problem here. So for this last problem, it's asking us to find the maximum revenue. Now, remember that word maximum. The word maximum always comes from the vertex. So if ever you're doing a word problem and it says maximum or minimum, you know you need to calculate out the vertex. So let's do that. So to calculate out the vertex, I'm going to do x is equal to the opposite of b over 2 times a. So then when you plug that in, you end up getting negative 250 divided by negative 50, so you get that x is equal to 5. So that's my axis of symmetry and the x-coordinate of the vertex. Guess what? The maximum revenue comes from the y-coordinate of the vertex. So to get the y-coordinate of the vertex, I'm going to take this 5 and I'm going to plug it in for each of my x's. So I get negative 25 times 5 squared plus 250 times 5 plus 400. So if you have a nice calculator, like a scientific one or a graphing one, you can actually plug it into your calculator just as I have it written here, and it'll give you the right answer. So when you plug it in, and maybe try it along with me to make sure you're doing it right, you get $1,025. So that is your final answer for number 4. So that concludes your note video for today. Please make sure you take that Schoology quiz once you're done. Thanks for listening.